It's time to review Cat Magic. I need a theme song. So, Cat Magic is a book by Rika Moonsong, who has been pretty active fairly recently despite being a new author. Now, in the case of Cat Magic, it's only like 160 pages of actual content, but it came out, cut off, but it's 2003, August. It's published 4 books in a relatively short amount of time. 2 books in 2023 and 2 books in 2024. 3 out of the 4 keeping the relative theme of magic animals, so to speak. And Cat Magic was a request by one of my viewers because they said, I want you to review it because it was on a list of the lowest reviewed animal magic books. So, let's get into it. So the book is divided up into a variety of really short sections, and I can actually appreciate at least the style that the book is written, in the sense that there is the various blurbs about related topics, and then there is a ritual relating to the previous text before moving on to the next section. And of course, there is something fairly immediately for me to have opinions on. On the first page of the introduction, there is, while it might be said that we domesticated cats, make no mistake that they choose to work alongside us and allow us into their lives. You've described domestication right there. Also, right under it, it states that the author is a born witch. In my opinion, that means she was born. I personally don't like this term. I don't think it actually means anything. And the usage of the term promotes a lot of things, including kind of a hierarchy within the magic community and so forth, that shouldn't exist. But I will state, right after the introduction, we see the book's what I think are great illustrations, and it's a variety of cats. They're all done in the same style, and by the same person, Maggie Vanderwall. In the section of the book called Egyptian Feline Deities, there is a decent blurb about Mefdet, Sekhmet, and Bast. And I think this section is exemplary of one of my main problems with the book, is that almost everything looks like it's smaller versions of Wikipedia articles put together to a different literary work. Especially when they're talking about deities. In my opinion, it's too broad and simplified. For example, the section on Sekhmet seems to really shy away from certain aspects of her character, and the closest thing we get to that is talking about how vengeful she is. Shying away from an aspect of Sekhmet as, a bloodthirsty goddess, because that is indeed how she's described in Egyptian text, almost to avoid any kind of negative association with these cat figures that could possibly be had by the reader. But it is relatively thorough. Obviously, I don't believe that they state every aspect of any feline deity, but they mention the Polish spirit Ovidink, which, as a Polish descended person, is interesting to see because Polish mythology in general is less distributed than, we'll say, Egyptian, Norse, Greek, and all of them. So there are kudos to this book. She also does correctly state, in reference to the cats that pull Freya's chariot, are not originally named in the myths, but have been given names by a modern author, which kudos. A lot of people, whenever they write the names, seem to leave out that information. And there is a spell in the book to ask for courage from these cats, and does something that I do think is an important step to at least tell new people, and that is to bid farewell to the presence that you're bringing into the ritual, because there are many cases in which it is believed that anything that you summon, if you don't bid farewell to them, just stick around after the ritual with nothing to do, which some believe may have, devastating effects. So, yeah, I certainly believe that this is an important step to at least tell people of and be mindful of, which, again, I've seen a lot of spells that don't do this. And then we have to deal with something that more confuses me when talking about even more cultures and their involvement with cats, and that is referring to the yokai of Japanese folklore as supernatural cats, and seemingly saying that all yokai are cats. To my understanding of yokai, this is not the case. While there are supernatural cats in that category, not all yokai are cats, to even the point of there are basically inanimate objects given life that are given the classification of yokai. And in the section where she talks about the history of cats being associated with witches, um, has this whole section here about cat's blood supposedly being put in cures, and that was seen as malicious by the church one way or another, and did not want people going to heathen healers and such, and the persecution of both the cats and the witches in this manner. While I'm certainly not saying that the Inquisition never happened, or that they, church in general, were not very adamant about trying to have a perceived notion of healers, for the most part, healers would be left alone. We do have to remember Christian mystics existed, and for the most part, as long as it was seen that you were not doing anything malicious, that or you got involved in some personal or political drama where someone would accuse you, you were left alone. Well respected healers, pellers, spiritual doctors, whatever you want to call them, were left alone to, some degree. So I feel like the wording of this pushes an unhistorical narrative. And in this section, talking about animal guides, she says that she uses that term to avoid cultural appropriation, which is a notion that I like, except I think more authors should do it, but I do find it weird, particularly in the case of this book, as there is a spell to open your crown chakra after an oversimplified explanation of what chakras are, and the spell is very much European witchcraft vibe, or at least the popular consideration of it. All of the cultural context has been removed from it, and it's a bad taste in my mouth, especially after the statement of trying to avoid cultural appropriation. Also, when talking about if your cat is a familiar or guide and like how to tell, a lot of it is talking about just basic cat behaviors. It feels like over spiritualizing mundane things to me. Also, in that section, there is a lot of talk about not all familiars take physical form and stuff, which is true. In fact, I would say most don't. But the author also contradicts this by saying that, of course, her familiar does. In fact, it's in its fourth incarnation, as in she's had a physical pet, which is her familiar, and it has died and came back to her. So again, very much I'm an exception to the rule kind of thing, and I don't necessarily like judging this because this might be like a part of their grieving process, but again, it kind of feels like I'm a special witch. Also, in a section where they talk about like all cats are magical, whether they're your guide or familiar or not, uses the term, your muggle cat is no muggle at all. Again, I'm very iffy about the usage of the word muggle. Just using a, like fantasy witch term and all this is odd to me. But I will end my review of the content by saying I appreciate that she is against animal cruelty in not plucking your cat's whiskers for spell products. A review on Amazon states that her 12-year-old loves it, really loves cats, and to me, this is who the book is for. Either really young or really new people to Magick. Most other people are not going to get a lot about it because of how broad and vague it is, and how incorrect it is on many subjects. But there is still good information in here. I guess it's not completely useless. But I do have some concerns about the author, and that's going to be in part 2. I thank you all for watching. So I definitely see what you mean by this comment, in that Born Witch might not be able to create a hierarchy in this way. So I'm going to explain what I meant by that. Now, what you're referring to are institutionalized hierarchies in a magic tradition. What I was talking about when I said that was more social hierarchies within the community as a whole. Because it then creates cliques of these people who have identified as born witches, and oftentimes they're seen as somehow better than non born witches. And this is something that defies tradition, in the sense that you don't need to be a particular, tradition to identify as a born witch and still put yourself up on that social hierarchy based on something that we can't prove, we can't identify, and we can't quantify. What makes a born witch? Now, I know in some traditions there are things to be said of certain kinds of witches, in the sense of they might be more intuitive or destined to be a certain kind of witch based on like when they were born, certain moon phases or something like that. And that's not inherently what I'm talking about, because this whole concept of a born witch basically states, oh, I was born doing magic. Meanwhile, you all got into it in your preteens during your emo phase. Possibly as a way to like step up people from familial practices who have no such concept to them. And I've spoken before about how familial practices, when someone says that they're from a familial practice, that's incredibly hard to vet unless you're in a familial practice like that. Because, like, I'm going to be honest, I have gone up to people and be like, you call yourself a sky caller? Who's your grandma? Born witches don't even have that. But they get to tout that status, so to speak. And that status creates a hierarchy socially. I hope that was thorough, and thank you for the comment. It wasn't really a question, but I still felt like I had to answer what I meant in response to it. If I'm still missing something, or if anyone else has any questions, be free to leave them in the comments. Eventually, I'll post the part 2, and maybe some of them will end up in the YouTube video. This is part 2 of my review of the book Cat Magic, though this is actually going to focus on the author here, Reika Moonsong. Now, what made me want to actually research the author at all is, for one, a lot of information is hard to find, and whenever I do, it says roughly the same thing as this paragraph, give or take. This one has her email. And the only information that we have about necessarily her qualifications is a Wiccan high priest and a Mesocarian Andean-trained shaman, as in she is trained in the shamanic practices of the Andes Mountains, which is a rather large mountain range in South America. So ideally, there's likely a lot of individual cultures and practices here. And I also don't personally know enough on, the practices of these various regions to state on whether Mesa carrying is an indication of anything. With some indication from some admittingly somewhat shady websites that carrying such a thing is indeed meaning that they've been initiated into such practices. But again, in my mind, it's what practice specifically. I'm going to compare this with the About Me of an author that I recommend, and that is Mortellus, who wrote the book Bones Fall in a Spiral, a book I legitimately recommend for a variety of reasons. In their various About Me's that you can find, they are a third-degree Gardnerian high priestess of the Long Island tradition. And their book specifically is about necromancy. They are also a mortician, they have a degree in mortuary science. These are all things that I can fact check. I inherently trust an author more when they actually put things like this that's publicly available in the books and everything else, because like I can ask questions. I can go across, various channels, and I can be like, hey, have you ever heard of this person? You're also a Gardnerian. Who can I get into contact with that's of the Long Island tradition? Now, admittedly, Rika might be part of the self initiated, kind of free form version of Wicca, which I'm not going to say is invalid, though it does bring a lot of things into question. But, it's certainly valid, and that could be how she's going about. But again, taking the position of High Priestess, how did she get that? And I also was searching for other people who reviewed her works, because, that I feel like that's an important step. Maybe they, got something out of it that I missed, or maybe they also dislike something that I missed. I feel like it's part of my due diligences, and there were almost no negative reviews of this author. Which is one thing for like Amazon not to show you, but at all, it intrigued me, and I searched a further net, and I searched for reviews of all of Reika's books, and I found on a website called Net Gallery, in which is you can sign up to be a reviewer, and you can specifically sign up to review certain books, is about the only place that I personally found negative reviews of the author. I, of course, also looked at the positive ones, because I don't want to. Like, my review is about my biases, but I still want to put in good things that perhaps other people wrote. And, of course, this one talks about how Animal Magic was for a intro to Magic series, and I think that's the target audience for Reika in any real sense of the word. And of course, I have not read Reika's other material, but from what I can find on a lot of these negative reviews, this one is cut off, but this was a person who specifically signed up to review Animal Magic. And they have a lot of the same concerns I did, seemingly talking about chakras with like almost nothing of the culture in which that comes from, which is important, even if chakras and all that are from like an open aspect of, as well as having a negative opinion that I share of a lot of the terminology that Reika uses, including Born Witch, which they used in Cat Magic, though apparently they have also used vibrations and twin flames. Vibrations, but at the same time, twin flames, yeah, that's one that has a lot of toxicity attached to it. And again, as you can see on this here, a lot of the saving grace of the book seems to be the artwork used. I was also able to find one negative review on Goodreads, and while this is not something that I was able to confirm, it shows quite a bit, such as the allowing of certain terminology, Islamophobia, and a bunch of other things, as well as blocking people in a wide range of anyone trying to get to talk to her about some of these things. And this review specifically mentions like how vibrational she is. This is coming from like her audience, the people she wants to connect to with her books. And while I won't show her social media because I don't want people to go to this author and harass her, I was able to find both a TikTok and an Instagram account attached to her, neither of which were verified, which I think is slightly bizarre. Especially as a published author, it should be relatively easy to get that verification of these accounts, if these accounts indeed belong to her. And both of these accounts seem to share a lot of the content, seemingly much more active on Instagram, and for the most part, it's generic memes about being a witch. You've probably seen them all without going to her page. Very few of which show her face, and a bunch of other things that, while could indeed be valid reasons behind these things, maybe she's camera shy, a variety of other things, it still comes off like this person might be not real and these books are written by AI. Both I and the very few negative reviews kind of come across the same conclusion, in the sense that the majority of what you can find in at least what I've read and seemingly what they read in Animal Magic is that it's easily Googleable. It's just in one, literature volume. And it doesn't go into a lot of detail, which is yet another thing. So it does kind of feel like this is just an AI who's taking the most common things attached to it, maybe rewriting it, possibly even directly from a Wikipedia or a similar source, and just putting snippets that fit her books. Not entirely helped by the fact that almost anything connected to Reka Moonsong uses the same, 3 photos, especially of, a woman smiling in a witch hat, but it's the same one, same pose, same everything. While there is very possibly non-malicious, and this could be a real person just going about life, it does feel like AI, which is a problem in a lot of today's Magic literature just being written by AI. Such as this author, Mary Silva, who has been basically outed as AI, and not to mention, this book on trolldom is trash. These are not accusations necessarily, these are just thoughts, but I do think these are important thoughts, especially when reviewing and either saying that I like a book or I don't like a book to be based on. So in short, I believe that the majority of the works of Reka Moonsong can be confirmed to mostly be for beginners, and quite a lot of very questionable material and some outdated thinking. Perhaps the book is for you, but it certainly wasn't for me, and if I had family getting into Magic, I probably would not use any books by Reka Moonsong with all the concerns in which I have, and hopefully if you share these feelings from what I've told you, you can do your own research and decide for yourself. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant.